Today's video is going to be about books and series that I have not finished. And this isn't going to be in any particular order, but I am going to start with the most controversial, maybe. And I will say, and I'll probably mention this again throughout the video, just because I haven't yet finished them doesn't mean that I'm not ever going to finish these books, but they're not like top priority and I didn't finish them at the time that I started them. So, starting off with the controversial one, I have the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I know, how can I be a fantasy reader and not have read this trilogy? It's like where it all started, virtually. I don't know, I just didn't really get on with these books. Now, I may have started them when I was too young, because they are quite challenging books. I mean, they don't look particularly long, but the first book is the shortest at 531 pages. So they're not particularly long, not compared to some of the books that I read. And it's not the length of them that intimidated me. I think I just didn't get on with the writing style in these books. I've tried to read them a couple of times. I think the first time I tried to read it, I got halfway through the Fellowship of the Ring, which is the first one. And the second, that was maybe when I was about 14-ish, 15-ish. And then I tried to read them again when I was about maybe 16 or 17 possibly. And I got all the way through Fellowship of the Ring and then only about a third of the way through the Two Towers. I just really struggle with the writing in this series. It's just a little bit too descriptive for me. Like, I seem to remember there being page upon page of a description of a cave, and I was like, okay, it's a cave. I don't need to know any more than that. So I'm not ruling out trying to read these again now that I'm a bit older. Maybe I'll appreciate them more. But at the time, I just couldn't get through them, and I really don't DNF books very often. I mean, this video will make it look like I do, but as a rule, even if I'm not liking a book, I will just push through it. I do tend to DNF series, so if I read the first book in a series and it really doesn't pull me in, then I'll just not read the rest of the series. But it's not very often that I will just stop reading a book halfway through, but this was one of those very rare cases. So yeah, sorry, first one. The Lord of the Rings trilogy. I will try again one day, I'm sure. The next book is Inkheart by Cornelia Funk, and I read this book around the time that the film came out, because it was the film trailer that made me aware of this book, and the premise just sounded really, really interesting. It's about a girl and her father who are able to travel into a book, and it's a fantastical world. So they're from our world, but then they travel into this fantastical world inside a book, and they have to defeat the antagonist. But I don't remember much more about this than that, because I've again read this maybe when I was around 13, 14-ish, and the premise sounds so interesting, but it just didn't really deliver for me. It didn't drag me in. I didn't finish this book and think, oh, I really need to read the next one. So I didn't. And now it's been so long that I'm not really that bothered, to be honest. And I'm not tempted to reread this one so that I can then reread the series. So again, never say never. But yeah, this one just didn't really grab my attention. Also, I just realised I didn't tell you the premise for The Lord of the Rings, but I am presuming that you know what the premise of that one is. If you don't, there's an evil ring and a band of different races have to group together to go on a very long journey to try and destroy this ring. I'm not going to go more in detail than that. Next book is Howls Moving Castle, which I only just discovered was a book this year, which is embarrassing, but oh well. It's the truth. It's by Diana Wynne Jones, and it's actually a children's book, and if you don't know, it was adapted into an animated film by Studio Ghibli, and it's my favourite film ever, of all time. I absolutely love the film. And so when I discovered that it was a book, I like immediately bought it and read it, and I really enjoyed it. Now, this is one of those rare occasions where I prefer the film to the book, but that isn't really a reflection on the book. It's more a reflection on the fact that I just absolutely love the film. As I said, it's my favourite film of all time. I'm obsessed with that film. And so this book would have had to have done something pretty incredible to beat the film in my mind, which it didn't do, and that's probably because I'm not the target audience of this book. I am a 27-year-old woman, not an 11-year-old girl or boy. It is a children's book, but it was nice to read the characters from a different perspective. I still loved the characters. There were some storylines in this that didn't happen in the film, which I really enjoyed. I believe that this is actually part of a series. I don't know if it's a trilogy or a series, but I know that there's more than one book. But I don't really feel motivated to pick them up because this story holds such a special place in my heart that I'm kind of scared to ruin it by reading sequels. So I'm making a conscious decision not to read the sequels to this, not because I don't like the book and not because I don't love the film, because I do, but because I don't want to taint those warm and fuzzy feelings that I have for this story by reading sequels. Essentially, I'm just afraid they'll ruin it. So that's that one. On a similar vein, while we're on that sort of subject, the Black Magician Trilogy by Trudy Canavan actually has a follow-up trilogy, and I discussed this series in my BookTube newbie tag video. But essentially what this one is about is it's about a girl named Sonia who is from the slums and so shouldn't have magic but discovers that she does, and so she ends up going to a magic school to learn all about her powers, and while there she discovers that not everything is as it might seem. I mentioned in my BookTube newbie video that I absolutely love this trilogy. I love the characters, I love the plot, I love the world. It's fantastic. Please read it. And again, I don't want to ruin this series by reading the part 2 trilogy because I've heard it's not as good. And again, this story is just so special to me and the characters are so special to me that I don't want to spoil it by reading a substandard part 2 series. So I'm not ruling out ever reading them. I might, but I am tentative about it, and as of right now I'm not going to read part 2. But I mean, if you've read them, then let me know. Is it worth picking them up? Do they ruin this original trilogy? Are they actually good? What do you think of them if you've read them? I'd really love to know. So that's that one. So again, I haven't finished the series, but it is a conscious decision that I have made because I love the original trilogy. The next book I have is The Tiger in the Well by Philip Pullman, and this is part of a series called the Sally Lockhart series, and I picked this up because I'd just read His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, which is The Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass, which is another series that I discussed in my BookTube newbie video, and I really enjoyed that series. And so I thought, well, Philip Pullman's also written this series, so why don't I pick this one up and give it a go. And this one is a very different premise. This is a historical fantasy setting, and I just didn't enjoy it. Honestly, it just didn't pull me in. I read it and I finished it because, again, it's very, very rare that I will start and not finish a book. But yeah, I'll read you the blurb. In a respectable tea shop in London, a girl with a pistol is holding off 3 men. Sally Lockhart is fighting for her child, a child that is suddenly hers no longer. Driven from her home, Sally is in hiding, desperately trying to find out who is turning her life upside down. Meanwhile, the man she is seeking is in a house in Spitalfields, directing his lackeys to snare her deeper and deeper. No one will stop him, for he is the tzaddik. So, it's historical fiction. The blurb doesn't say that, but it is. It's historical fiction, and it's kind of like mystery thriller. It's just not really my thing, but I gave it a go. I just didn't love it. Again, I was quite young when I read this, probably 13ish, maybe a bit younger. I can't really remember 100% when I read it, but it was a long time ago. So it might be that this would appeal to me more now, but even reading that blurb, I'm not overly interested. And because of that, I didn't pick up the rest of the series, and I'm not motivated to reread this and then pick up the series. So again, never say never, but I'm probably not finishing this one. And the last series I want to talk to you about is The Secrets of the Immortal Nicholas Flamel by Michael Scott. And the first book is The Alchemist. Oh, I don't know if I'm saying these in order actually. The Alchemist is definitely the first one, and then there's The Magician, The Sorceress, and The Warlock. Now, I've definitely read these 3, but I can't actually remember reading The Warlock, so I may not have done. I read these when I was about 15, and I really, really enjoyed them, but they were still being written at the time that I read them, and like I said in my last video, I really don't love picking up series that aren't finished, because I like to binge series all in one go. But I have got over that a little bit now that I'm a bit older. For example, I've started reading Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, which is 3 books into 10. And I think it's not going to be until something crazy like 2060 or 70 that the series will actually be finished, if his current timetable continues the way it is. So I'm not as worried anymore about starting series and not having all of the books. So I may pick these back up. I'll read you the blurb again because it's been a long time. The truth. Nicholas Flamel was born in Paris on the 28th of September 1330. Nearly 700 years later, he is acknowledged as the greatest alchemist of his day. It is said that he discovered the secret of eternal life. The records show that he died in 1418, but his tomb is empty. The legend. Nicholas Flamel lives, but only because he has been making the elixir of life for centuries. The secret of eternal life is hidden within the book he protects, the Book of Abraham the Mage. It's the most powerful book that has ever existed. In the wrong hands, it will destroy the world. That's exactly what Dr. John Dee plans to do when he steals it. Humankind won't know what's happening until it's too late. And if the prophecy is right, Sophie and Josh Newman are the only ones with the power to save the world as we know it. Sometimes legends are true, and Sophie and Josh Newman are about to find themselves in the middle of the greatest legend of all time. So, at the time that I read it, that premise sounded so interesting, and it still does. So I haven't finished this series, and the reason is because it wasn't all out when I first read the series, the books that were out. I read all the ones that were out, and then I picked up the 4th one, The Warlock, when it came out. I can't remember if I read it or not. But I'm pretty sure this series has now been finished and all the books are out. So I probably will pick this back up again at some point because the premise, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the books when I first read them. It's just that I didn't continue because they went out of my mind, if I'm being honest. But I probably will pick this series back up. But as of right now, it's a series that I've started and haven't finished. And if I'm going to read them, I will have to reread the whole thing because I honestly don't remember much of what it's about. But it is urban fantasy, I believe. So it's set in our world, but a version of our world where mythical creatures and things exist. The last book I want to talk about, actually, I don't have here because I read an ebook of it, so I had forgotten until just this moment. But earlier this year, I read The School for Good and Evil, and I can't remember the name of the author, but I will write it somewhere, and I didn't like it. The premise is this, it's kind of like a fairy tale story. Well, not kind of like, it is a fairy tale story. And it's about this village who every few years, the headmaster of the School for Good and Evil comes to take two children, one to go to the School for Good and one to go to the School for Evil. And the story follows two female protagonists who end up going to the School for Good and Evil, except they end up in the opposite schools to where everybody expected them to end up and where they expected them to end up. And the premise sounds really interesting. And it is a what's called a middle grade book, so a children's book, which I don't have a problem with. I mean, like I said, I really enjoyed Howl's Moving Castle, not as much as the film, but that wasn't a reflection on the book. So I don't have an issue with the age range. What I have an issue with is, and this might sound a little harsh, so I apologise, but I just don't think it's terribly well written, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think the point of children's books is to, well, it's so that children can read, of course, but also the aim, in my opinion, should be to try and expand that child's vocabulary. And some of the grammar in this book was pretty bad. Some of the sentence structures were pretty bad, in my opinion. And I'm not a parent, but I have young cousins, and I wouldn't buy this book for my young cousins because I wouldn't want them to pick up those bad habits, because some of it, I was just reading it going, well, that's just really, really badly written. I wouldn't want to teach a child that that's how you should write, because it isn't. And the pacing was just a little bit too slow for me. And again, I stuck with it even though I wasn't enjoying it, because that's just what I do. I don't like stopping a book halfway through. I like to give that book a chance to be all it can be by finishing it. And then I'll decide about the rest of the series. And this is one where I have absolutely no interest in reading the rest of the series because the writing wasn't great in my opinion. And the story was just a little bit slow. So that's it. Those are all the books that I want to talk about today. A little bit of a negative video, I'm afraid, but I think it's quite nice sometimes to give some critical opinions. So there is no offence meant. If any of these books are on your favourites list, then that's great. I'm so glad that you enjoyed them. I'm sad that I didn't enjoy them, in fact. But that's where I am. If you think that I should reconsider my opinions on any of these, then please do let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again here soon. Bye!